Later that evening in the city of Cremo, the mountains in the distance shook as a massive eruption burst from the ridge. A thick plume of black ash rolled upward, drifting through the sky until it settled far across the horizon. The Count watched from his window, growing increasingly concerned as the dark cloud spread. At the source of the eruption, Lloyd and Javier stood with Bangul. Lloyd stared in awe at her newly revealed ability, using his skill to scan the drifting ash and confirm that it was genuine volcanic material. He turned to Javier and laughed, asking if he had seen that and if it had impressed him, but Javier simply stared up at the sky without responding. Lloyd raised his voice at Javier, asking if he was deaf. Javier finally turned toward him and asked what he had said, clearly unable to hear anything after the blast. Lloyd took advantage of the moment and shouted that Javier was ugly, and Javier responded by telling him he was not as ugly as Lloyd. The two eventually started down the mountainside, as Lloyd explained that they finally had the last ingredient needed for the cement. With everything gathered, they could now begin the real work. The next day, people gathered throughout the city as Lloyd prepared Bangul to produce more volcanic ash. He'd attached a large sack to her rear to catch whatever came from the blast, drawing plenty of curious looks from the crowd. Lloyd signalled for Bangul to begin and shouted for everyone to cover their ears, warning that she was going to blow. Bangul braced herself, lifted her rear toward the sky, and released her explosive skill while the crowd looked on with a mixture of intrigue and confusion. Observing the entire process, the Count realised that Lloyd was no ordinary engineer. He had never seen methods like these, nor had he ever encountered the creatures Lloyd had summoned. He decided to keep a close watch and report everything to His Majesty, concluding that leaving someone like Lloyd hidden away in the backwoods would be a waste. Days passed as Lloyd began the main construction. The first step was creating a caisson, a large mould that would hold the cement. Once it was finished, the team lowered it into the sea and brought in hamang to drain the water from inside. With the interior cleared, Javier moved in and secured the base of the mould, hammering friction posts deep into the seabed. Javier eventually asked when more posts would arrive, and Lloyd grinned at him, noting how cooperative he had been during the build. He pointed out that Javier had not even delivered his usual complaint about knights being forced to do this kind of labour. Javier stared at him for a moment before walking away, deciding to complain after all by stating that knights should not be hammering anything. Lloyd responded with his usual line, reminding him that he was his knight and had to protect the barony, and the only way to do that was to clear their debt. He asked if Javier wanted the baron to be sad, then pressed his hands together and pleaded, calling him their only hope. Javier scowled, knowing Lloyd was right. Once Javier finished the hammering, they used steel rods to build a frame inside the mould. The rods came from Bangul's other skill, her steel dung. After that, they poured the cement inside, waited for it to cure, and removed the mould, revealing the finished platform for the statue. Standing beside the Count, Lloyd explained that he had built the platform to sit just above sea level so the statue would appear to float. The Count asked if it could truly support the statue's weight, and told Lloyd that if it held, he would not be disappointed with his reward. Lloyd gave a small bow and smiled. Later, the statue was erected on the platform and 5 ships gathered around it as a celebration began across the decks. On one of the ships, Lloyd tugged at the collar of his formal attire and complained to Javier, asking how he could stand wearing clothing like this. Javier remarked that he was reacting as if he had never worn something formal before. Lloyd nervously tried to cover it up, claiming it had simply been a while. Before he could say more, the Count called for everyone's attention. He raised a hand toward Lloyd and announced that this was the man who had made the statue possible. The crowd murmured among themselves, commenting on how regal and composed Lloyd appeared. Unfortunately for him, they gathered around Javier instead, who happened to be standing right beside him. Lloyd kept his expression steady while Javier received the praise. He reminded himself that he expected this outcome and that he was not jealous at all. Yet something about Javier's pitying look bothered him. The Count approached, laughing as he claimed the crowd reacted that way because of Lloyd's face. Lloyd wondered why the Count took so much joy in teasing him about his face. Once the Count finished amusing himself, he told everyone that the man standing right beside him was the one they should be praising. The crowd turned toward Lloyd in shock, admitting they had assumed he was a servant. As the celebration continued, something stirred just beneath the surface of the sea. The monster that had been lurking in the waters slowly raised its head above the waves, catching sight of the mermaid statue standing on the platform. Fury rippled through it. A mermaid had dared to intrude on its territory. It sank back under the water and moved closer, circling beneath the waves as a single thought echoed through its mind. There was only one of them. With its enemy exposed, this was its chance to strike down its long-hated foe. The creature rushed toward the statue, preparing to attack. Javier sat on the edge of the ship, staring out over the ocean while drinking his wine. A sudden chill ran down his spine as he sensed danger approaching. Lloyd approached Javier and asked if something was wrong. Javier continued staring into the ocean and told him he thought something was approaching. Lloyd asked him to elaborate, and Javier explained that he didn't know what it was, only that it was coming fast. When Lloyd asked if he could sense the size, Javier estimated that it might be as large as a ship. The realization struck Lloyd immediately. He knew exactly what was on its way. He hurried to the Count and told him that the monster was approaching and that they needed to evacuate. The Count turned to his knight and asked if he sensed anything. The knight scanned the sea and reported that he felt nothing. The Count explained that his knight was nearly at the level of a sword master and that his senses were incredibly sharp. He suggested that Lloyd trust those senses. Lloyd, however, knew that Javier's were even sharper. Javier was the main character after all. He wondered how he could convince the Count to listen. The Count chuckled and told him not to worry. The monster had never come this close to shore. Lloyd looked at him with growing concern and said that there might be a reason it would now. He lifted his gaze to the statue. Understanding slowly formed on the Count's face. The knight tried once more to insist that they should trust his senses, but the Count interrupted him and shouted for everyone to raise their anchors and move away from the statue. Crews rushed to obey as the monster closed in. Javier leaned toward Lloyd and told him they were taking too long. It would reach them soon. Lloyd instructed Javier to handle the anchor, and Javier nodded before leaping into the ocean and diving to the bottom. Lloyd threw Podong in the familiar style of a monster-capturing trainer, as if starting a battle, saying, "I choose you." Podong flew through the air, swallowed one of his red seeds, grew massive in an instant, and landed on the statue. Below the water, Javier reached the anchor and sliced through the iron chain, freeing the ship. Above, Podong scrambled to remove the ropes holding the ships to the platform, while Javier moved from ship to ship below, cutting each anchor loose. He suddenly felt the monster's presence speeding toward them. With the ships released, they began to spread away from the statue, but the monster erupted from the water with tremendous force, sending people flying from the decks, Lloyd included. It slammed into the statue and knocked Podong away as well. Javier burst out of the ocean, channeling energy through his sword to propel himself upward, and caught Lloyd before he hit the water. Behind them, the statue sailed through the air from the monster's attack, crashed toward the city of Cremo, and slammed into the streets. People who had been thrown from the ship struggled to stay afloat. Lloyd shouted for Hamang to jump in and save them. Hamang dove into the sea and swept both the water and the people into its mouth for safety. Javier called to Lloyd, warning that the monster was heading toward the city, but then realised Lloyd was no longer beside him. He looked down to find Lloyd sailing in the opposite direction on a piece of debris. Javier shouted that he was going the wrong way. Lloyd looked up, telling Javier that he wasn't a fool. There was no way they could fight something like that. Charging it would only get them killed. He asked Javier if he had lost his marbles. Javier stared at him in disbelief. Were they running away? The Count ordered the crew to rescue the people in the water as Hamang returned those he had saved, depositing them onto the ships that were still afloat. Meanwhile, the monster pushed deeper into the city, tearing through buildings as it searched for the statue. Back at the ships, Lloyd urged Javier to get on so they could escape. Javier asked if he truly intended to ignore all the people who were in danger. Lloyd shouted that they had come here to make money, not to fight something like that monster. The city had artillery and an army, and he insisted they should let the soldiers handle it. Javier froze in disbelief. After everything they had faced, Lloyd had never wavered. No matter how dangerous things became, he always found a way to push through. So why was he running now? Javier wondered if this was the real Lloyd. A system alert flickered before Lloyd, informing him that he had lost Javier's approval, decreasing by 5 points. Javier drew his sword and told Lloyd that he would not abandon those in need. Lloyd told him to stop acting so righteous all the time, warning that he could die if he rushed in like this. But Javier didn't listen. He turned away and began making his way toward the city. At the city, the army prepared their cannons as the monster advanced toward them. They fired volley after volley, but the projectiles bounced harmlessly off its shell without slowing it down. The creature halted for a moment, opening a section of its armour before releasing a jet of pressurised water that obliterated a guard tower. Its eyes flared when it spotted the statue. The mermaid had to die. With that thought driving it forward, the monster tore through the city, sending people running in every direction. Amid the chaos, one man stumbled and fell as a massive claw came crashing down toward him. Javier appeared in the air, his sword blazing as he struck the descending claw. The mana blast bounced off the armoured surface without leaving a mark. The monster roared and redirected its fury toward him, swinging its claws in rapid succession. Javier dodged each strike, but then the creature unleashed another jet of water. He braced himself, knowing he wouldn't evade it this time. The blast hit him head on and launched him into a wall. He hit the ground hard. Javier pushed himself up with his sword as the monster closed in. He knew he couldn't defeat something like this, but he hoped he had bought the people enough time to escape. Steadying himself, he told his battered body to hold on a little longer. He wasn't done yet. He still had lives to save. Meanwhile, Lloyd was making his way farther from Cremo. He told himself he wasn't some overpowered main character. Every skill he had was tied to construction. What could he possibly accomplish if he went back to the city? Of course, the thought of people dying made him sad, but he insisted there was nothing he could do. He stopped paddling. He wondered if he should really leave things like this. The thought of people dying made his jaw tighten. If he had even a chance to help, then he had to try. Determination settled in. He told Bangul they were heading back because he needed to make sure he received those construction payments. With that decided, he climbed onto her back as she released a volcanic blast, propelling them toward the city. Javier was still fighting the monster, desperate to hold it back, while the city continued its evacuation. There had to be a weak spot, he thought. It was still just an animal after all. He tried aiming for its eyes, hoping that area might be vulnerable, but his sword only bounced off the armoured surface. He retreated for a moment, trying to decide where to strike next. Before he could make another move, he heard a familiar voice shouting for Hamang to attack. A large yellow ball suddenly flew through the air, slamming into the massive creature and sending it crashing into a building. Hamang tumbled downward, releasing the water stored inside its body, shrinking rapidly as it emptied. It fell back onto Lloyd's head while Lloyd glared at the monster like a demon, furious that it had dared to interfere with his cash flow. Javier watched the monster crash to the ground and thought this was his opportunity. He moved in for another attack, charging his mana blast once more, but it bounced off the creature again without leaving so much as a scratch. He leapt back, realising he had no chance of winning on his own. Yet despite that, A strange calm settled over him. He wondered why he felt so steady in a situation like this until it dawned on him. Lloyd was here. With Lloyd present, he knew a solution would come. Somehow, some way, Lloyd would find a method to bring the creature down. 2 minutes earlier, Lloyd rode Podong through the city, bouncing across rooftops as they moved. He warned Podong not to get too close to the monster. From a distance, he watched it clash with Javier and knew he needed to figure out its weak spot. He saw Javier unleash a mana blast that did nothing, and he couldn't believe it. How strong was that shell? What was it even made of? Then he paused. What was the shell made of? Could he use his ability to find out? He activated his skill, Survey, and scanned the monster. To his surprise, it worked. A detailed breakdown appeared before him exactly as if he were analysing building materials. The shell was a mixture of dentin and chitin, and it was a full metre thick. Lloyd examined it at a molecular level and saw a tightly woven honeycomb structure. He couldn't help but be impressed. The armour was incredibly strong. As he continued watching, Javier struck again, and Lloyd saw the energy disperse toward a single point, the horn. He realised the shell redirected the force to the horn before releasing it. The first step was clear. They needed to remove the horn. He activated simulation mode next and identified the spot holding the water sac for its hydraulic claw. If they could hit that area with a mana blast, they could destroy it, he concluded. Back in the present, Javier shouted to Lloyd, asking how they were supposed to kill this thing. Lloyd held his hand to his forehead, pointing his finger upward to mimic a horn, then motioned across his hand as if slicing it off. Javier, not understanding, asked if he had lost his mind. Lloyd, running out of patience, shouted for him to cut off the damn horn. Javier finally understood and leapt toward the monster, making his way to its horn. He landed on its shell and sprinted up its back toward its head. Lloyd called out a warning, telling him that the horn might be hollow, but it wouldn't be easy to cut. He reminded him that using his mana circles wasn't only about hitting hard. Javier asked what he should do. Lloyd told him to make fast bursts like a saw. As Javier reached the horn, he muttered that it was easier said than done before launching himself at it and cutting into the surface. He tried to use the technique Lloyd had described, grinding through the horn with controlled bursts of mana. Lloyd grinned as he watched. That was it. Use it like a chainsaw. He hadn't known whether his theory would work, but Javier seemed to be pulling it off. The creature roared in pain as Javier carved through the horn, then swung its claw toward him. Lloyd shouted for Podong to help. Podong leapt at the monster and slammed into the claw, knocking it off course. At last, Javier broke through and severed the horn completely. The creature howled from the loss. Lloyd shouted for Javier to move to the area where its middle legs met and to strike at an angle from its tail toward its head. Javier rushed beneath the monster as Lloyd directed him. He slid across the ground, searching for the exact spot. Lloyd shouted for him to use his mana blast so they could finally get paid. Javier angled his sword, but his eyes widened as the creature suddenly collapsed on top of him. Lloyd stared in shock. Only Javier's sword remained visible, lying on the ground without its master. A few moments earlier, just as the monster was about to crash down on Javier, Podong rushed in, grabbed him by the collar with its teeth, and dragged him away, moments before the creature slammed into the ground. When the dust settled, Lloyd saw Podong holding Javier safely. Podong seemed frantic, trying to say something to Javier, as if worrying over him. Javier apologised and told it he didn't understand. He picked up his sword and remarked that perhaps Podong was scolding him for being reckless. He thanked Podong and said he would try to stay alive until they defeated the monster. Watching the exchange, Lloyd fell into thought. His plan was harder than expected. The creature was faster than he had anticipated. He decided he would need to adjust things, mix Plan A with Plan D. He called out to Pudong, and Pudong leapt to his side. Lloyd climbed on and told him to head to the place he had mentioned earlier. Pudong dashed off as Lloyd shouted to Javier, telling him to lure the monster toward the coast and into the woods. Javier acknowledged the order without hesitation. As Lloyd made his way to his destination, he thought that he had bought them enough time. They should be finished by now. He needed the Count to complete what he had asked. 15 minutes earlier, the Count watched from his ship as the creature headed toward the city. He wondered how something like this could have happened, his face growing pale with worry. His knight bowed his head and asked for forgiveness, saying he should have detected the monster sooner. The Count told him he wasn't to blame. It was his own complacency. He should have considered that the statue might have angered the creature. Lloyd shouted up at him from the ocean, riding on Bangul's back, and claimed there was a way to save the city. He explained that the monster was fixated on the statue, and they could use that obsession to their advantage. He told the Count there was something he needed to do, while he and Javier distracted it. Back in the present, Javier led the monster toward the coast. He barely avoided its attacks as he ran. Starting to feel himself reaching his limit, he told himself he had to push past it if he wanted to save the people, then forced his legs to move again. He reached the woods and headed toward the destination Lloyd had given him. Suddenly, a loud voice rang out through the trees, as if someone were introducing a performer on a grand stage. Lloyd shouted for everyone to welcome the one and only mermaid statue. Javier stared in confusion as Lloyd rode past, carrying the statue, now stitched back together with rope, strapped to a cart that Pudong was pulling. Lloyd called to the monster, declaring its enemy was here. The creature roared at the sight of the statue and turned sharply toward Lloyd. Lloyd grinned, thinking that was the reaction he needed. He quietly thanked the Count for completing his task, and then shouted to Javier to watch for the opening he was about to create. Flustered, Javier shouted back that Lloyd should explain the entire plan next time. Lloyd rode past him and called out that there better not be a next time. The monster chased after Lloyd, and Javier moved beneath it once more. He positioned himself carefully, aiming at its weak point, then fired his mana blast. A massive explosion erupted. Lloyd looked back as Javier fell from the monster's towering height. Javier's eyes widened when he saw the result. It wasn't enough. He had only managed to open a hole. He couldn't finish it. He couldn't use mana blast anymore. He told himself he was too weak. He wasn't strong enough to protect the people. Then a voice reached him, telling him he had done well. He sees Lloyd approaching while riding Pudong, and he tells Javier to leave the rest to him. As Javier fell, he felt consciousness slipping away, yet a strange calm settled in. He knew he could count on Lloyd to finish this. Before he hit the ground, Hamang leapt beneath him and cushioned his fall. Lloyd shouted to Javier to rest easy, claiming he would protect the city no matter what. But he didn't believe his own words. Maybe he could just lure the creature farther away, he wondered. Then another thought struck him. Could he actually do something here? Pudong couldn't keep running much longer. He had to act now. He shouted for Pudong to do it. Pudong, understanding his intent, skidded to a halt and kicked Lloyd upward, launching him through the air toward the monster. As Lloyd flew, he wondered if he could really pull this off. He thought back to his earlier plans. One of them required using a mana blast himself. But to do that, he needed a triple heart circle. Right now, he only had a double. He shouted at the system, demanding to level up his heart circle by upgrading his Asrahan core technique. The system informed him it would cost 190 RP for the next level, and he currently had 1,901. It was expensive, but he needed to use everything he had. He poured all his points into it until he reached the final level, only to find he didn't have enough. He cursed his luck. He just needed a little more. Clinging to the monster's shell just below the open wound, he wondered what he should do now, dangling helplessly. He ran through every plan he could think of. but none led to victory. Javier looks up, seeing Lloyd struggling, then passes out again. The system abruptly informs him that his approval rating with Javier had risen again. He checked the display and saw he had gained just enough RP to finish levelling the Astrahan technique to level 10. Now he could do it. He completed the upgrade. His double heart circle began to glow, shifting into a triple heart circle as his mana surged, amplified by 500%. He gathered power into his shovel and shouted at the monster that it was dead meat. Then he began to build his mana blast, drawing all his power towards the wound. The creature thrashed wildly. Its claws smashed into buildings and a flying rock struck Lloyd's head. The impact disrupted his mana circles, destabilizing them and causing them to collide. He felt his consciousness fading, but he forced himself to raise his shovel and release everything he had. A massive explosion erupted from the wound, blasting straight through the creature and out the other side. The monster collapsed, and the entire city fell silent. Javier slowly came to after being knocked out. The 3 helpers crowded around him, trying to wake him. He sat up and asked if they were all right. Then he noticed the monster lying dead. He had actually done it, he thought, but how? Podong nudged him urgently, trying to get his attention. Javier understood and followed. The 3 helpers led him to Lloyd, and Javier's eyes widened at the sight. Lloyd lay limp on the ground, eyes open but void of any life, blood running from his head. Javier rushed to him and pressed his ear to Lloyd's chest. His eyes widened as he lifted his head. Lloyd's heart had stopped.